All workers deserve to have their rights as employees protected and to feel protected from potential harm at the workplace. However, there is one industry where the workers seem to be an exception. Sex workers face a great deal of stigma that can make their job more dangerous. Sex work is defined as any legal adult willingly selling sex and are not victims of sex trafficking. Sex workers are those who work in the sex industry, and their jobs can range from pornography to stripping to full-service sex work, which is previously known as prostitution. The commercial sex industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States alone. But what does this have to do with sex workers? Why are they being criminalized, and why do I need to care? My name is Michaela Normand, and I've been studying sex work and the policies affecting them for the past 3 years in my undergraduate degree. And in America, there is a lot of consumption of sex services, from porn to going to strip clubs, getting lap dances at bachelor and bachelorette parties, and so on. But the workers who provide these services are forced to navigate their safety due to the criminalization and stigma surrounding their job. But when discussing sex work, what are our options for legality, and what does these options mean for sex workers? Legalization is defined as when a government removes the prohibition of a previously illegal activity and punishments for participating in said activity. The legalization of sex work currently has support in over 15 countries, with the most famous model being the Nordic model. With the Nordic model, the selling of sex is now legal, however, the purchasing of sex services is illegal. This model faces opposition because while it does address the stigma that sex workers face, there are still obstacles when it comes to providing services. Legalization allows a government to create policies and barriers that would make it harder for sex workers to do their services, and they would need to abide by these policies. These policies could include licensures or certifications being mandatory for sex workers, which can disenfranchise the workers because it can make it harder for them to participate in the sex industry and sell sex independently, or make it harder for sex selling establishments to operate. Criminalization of sex work makes it illegal to sell sex services, and there are legal penalties for doing so. With the exception of Nevada, sex work is currently criminalized in all of the United States. Individuals can be arrested for soliciting sex, and full-service sex workers are most affected by this. The intent of criminalization is to prevent sex workers from facing abuse, sexploitation, and trafficking. However, criminalization has put sex workers in a challenging position, where they need to decide whether to report the violence that they face but criminalize themselves, or not report these instances of violence, which ultimately condones the behavior and activities that criminalization is trying to prevent. Decriminalization makes sex work legal and gives sex workers their same rights and protection that other industries have. However, the government cannot enforce specific requirements for sex workers to abide by, which makes doing sex work a lot easier than in legalization. This model has grown in global popularity after New Zealand decriminalized sex work in 2003. The World Health Organization supports decriminalization as well, as it can better protect sex workers' rights, and when the stigmas are challenged and resources that are currently being used to focus on sex work and its legality can then be reallocated to prevent sex trafficking and sexploitation. When discussing sex work and the policies surrounding it, it is crucial that sex workers are included. Currently, there is a gap between the thoughts of legislators and the thoughts of sex workers regarding policy. The research in this thesis aims to ask sex workers what their opinions and thoughts are on current legislation and about decriminalization, with the goal of starting a conversation that can close this gap. The sampling method used was convenience and snowball sampling. I emailed my personal contacts the survey advertisement, as well as a link to an anonymous survey that was taken via SurveyMonkey. I also posted this advertisement and links to my social media accounts and reached out to moderators of online sex work advocacy groups. This project was approved by Salem State University's IRB board and had a total of 6 participants. The 6 participants were current or former sex workers, and a sex worker was considered anyone that was a consenting adult that willingly participated in the industry. The types of sex work included were porn, full-service sex work, stripping, cam work, and more. Those under 18 and or those who were forced to participate in the commercial sex industry against their own will were excluded. Out of the participants, the majority have been doing sex work for 1 to 5 years. Participants identified as non-binary, 2 identify as women, and 1 identified as male. The majority of participants were white, as 4 participants identified as white, 1 identified as Asian or Asian American, and 1 participant found that their racial identity was not represented in the pre-selected answers given to them. Participants were also asked a series of open-ended questions. The first was, what changes would you like to see to laws surrounding sex work? The 2 main themes were increase of legal support, and the other was decriminalization. Some participants wanted to see law changes to increase legal support of sex workers. 1 participant stated that they would like to see the removal of prostitution, pandering, solicitation, and anti-brothel keeping laws, as well as no more licenses needed for strippers in certain areas. Another said that they wanted more laws to protect workers and clients from potentially dangerous situations, including mandatory STD and STI testing. Those that supported decriminalization wanted to see a total different set of policies than those who wanted to see legal support. These participants wanted to see a complete decriminalization of sex work in the United States. As mentioned previously, decriminalization is allowing sex workers to do their job with more autonomy. Participants were also asked how decriminalization would affect them. All participants stated that it would greatly benefit them. 1 participant even stated that they had to quit sex work because they were constantly being threatened with physical or sexual violence, and that if decriminalization was something in the United States, they would be able to be continuing their work in sex work. Sex workers would be able to screen clients, hold their employees accountable, and be able to reach out to the police if they needed assistance in potentially violent situations. Lastly, sex workers were asked in what ways could they be included in the creation of laws about sex work. 1 participant didn't know what would be best, while another thought that the unionization of sex workers would be beneficial. However, the primary theme was that sex workers needed to be included in the process of creating legislation. A participant stated that lawmakers need to listen to sex workers and their needs. There are very real needs that are going ignored, while another participant called for more sex workers in office. The second participant recognized that the stigma surrounding sex work can ruin someone's reputation if running for office. However, both of these participants called for sex workers to be in the legislative process when creating new policy. With decriminalization, sex workers will be able to face less stigma, which can hopefully allow them to take up more space in political discussions and in office. Sex workers deserve to have their needs acknowledged. This study was to research the opinions on sex workers and decriminalization. All 6 participants called for a change to the current U.S. policy for sex work, and every participant stated that decriminalization would not only positively impact them, but potentially their whole industry. With this information, there are ways that we can help support sex workers in their advocacy. The survey highlights what sex workers think about current legislation and future options for legislation. Sex workers have been incredibly proactive in voicing their opinions of legislation, especially online, but there's been a gap in the demands of sex workers, the research being done, and the policies being created. Social workers, politicians, advocates, and others who work with sex workers need to focus on their demands and amplify their voices. Future research should include the voices of sex workers and their thoughts on policy being created and policy already created. As this project demonstrates, sex workers are willing to share their experiences, and they want to work with legislators in creating policy. This inclusion of sex workers can provide invaluable information that can lead to improving their rights and legal protections. Thank you.